For the first time this decade, we have more Americans saying that it is not the government's responsibility to ensure that all Americans have health care coverage than say it is the government's responsibility. This is a shift. We've been asking this question regularly all through the decade, starting back in 2000. And look at the trend there. There was, in fact, a point back in 2006 when 69% of Americans said it was the government's responsibility to ensure that all Americans have health care. Now, that began to fall in our poll last November. That would be November of 08, when that number had dropped to just 54%. And now, a year later, this is our annual update on this measure, we have less than half, just 47% of Americans saying it's the government responsibility to see that all Americans have health care coverage, and half of Americans, 50%, now the other way, saying that it is in fact not the government's responsibility. As noted, and I would emphasize this marks a dramatic shift in these fundamental attitudes. We don't know exactly what's behind this shift in attitudes, but of course the proximate cause would be the health care debate. A lot of talk about government options and specifics of health care reform over the last several months, and perhaps that has changed Americans' response to this general question when we compare this year's responses to last year's, and in particular, the responses this year to the responses we got in the mid-decade years, when, as mentioned, up to 2/3 of Americans said it was the government's responsibility. One last point, this question, not shockingly, is highly partisan. Democrats still much more likely to say it is the government's responsibility to see that everyone has health care. Republicans, much less so. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Gallup's editor-in-chief.